All right. Terima kasih to Institute Technology Bandang and Dr. Prasanthi Sali for inviting me to present to you today. Selamat malam to all. Okay, let's move along. Next slide. So my presentation is focusing on transportation, and that's my sort of specialty. So today I'd like to outline my presentation. It's going to cover why do cities need to consider sustainability and sustainable transport, and how do multidisciplinary strategies enable sustainable transport in cities. I will be using two emerging transport policies and strategies, and also the 2032 Olympics planning, and I will discuss how multidisciplinary strategies enable sustainable transport in cities. What we are seeing today is, a transformation time in transportation in cities. People are looking for, there's a need for greener, safer cities, and there's a need to better leverage technology, and there's a need to plan for better customer experience, the users of the transport. I will provide some brief comments on reforming transport engineering education. I understand the university, has a transportation area, so I'll make some comments there. And then I'll finish with some conclusions on sustainable transport in cities. I do want to acknowledge the speakers this morning, Weni and Venkatachalam, in terms of, they have covered a few things in relation to transport. Certainly Weni did in relation to MRT Jakarta, so that was very useful. And certainly also the previous speaker, I really enjoyed his analytical and I suppose like his hobbies too. I might, if I have time, I might talk about my hobbies. Next slide, please. So, so why do cities need to become sustainable and resilient? I will offer some general comments, and then I'll sort of pick on some of the some brief comments about transportation. So people really want cities to be sustainable, beautiful, and pleasing places to live, whilst able to withstand the shocks that Venkatachalam mentioned, weather impacts, energy crisis, food and water shortages. So thus cities need to be resilient, and the question facing city planners and engineers is how to go about achieving this. There's a need for a clear understanding of the magnitude of the challenge. This is the rate at which we are probably decreasing our non-renewable resource use, reducing waste and emissions, improving environmental quality, greater resilience to external pressures, as mentioned before, and having efficient urban systems and enabling livability. One cannot plan or manage a city by focusing on separate sectors like transport, water, power, food, health, waste, etc., or by focusing on a particular part of the city. Like resilience is strongly determined by cross-scale and cross-sector interactions. There's emphasis, the emphasis should be on interactions between society, built environment, and the natural environment. And there's a necessity for governance, social engagement, leadership to align city development with building resilience and achieving sustainability. So in terms of transport, car ownership and congestion have continued to grow. Greenhouse emissions from transport have increased. Road safety targets have not been met, and objectives to improve livability have not been realized. And also the future emphasis in terms of transport should be on reducing the growth of traffic on the network, particularly where urban infill is planned, and increasing the capacity and level of service of other modes. That's public transport, cycling, micromobility, and walking. Thanks. Next slide. So let me sort of pick on 3 areas. And again, like I said, this morning they were covered by the first 2 speakers a bit, but external pressures. And those 3 that I've listed are urbanization, climate change, and new technology. So worldwide, the demand for professionals skilled in planning, designing, and constructing urban transport infrastructure is growing. Climate change will not alter this. It will only vary the mix between road, public transport, and active transport solutions. So this will require a more broadly trained engineering skill base with people understanding amenity, urban design, environmental impacts, demand management, as well as traditional road and rail engineering and transport economics. I think all the speakers have raised about the multidisciplinary approach in terms of looking for sustainability. So in terms of climate change, I think unless the world fails to address this challenge, we should be changing both what we design and how we build it. We need to focus on transport solutions that mitigate greenhouse gas impacts, and we are adapting to operate in an altered climate. We need to improve our ability to measure greenhouse gas impacts of transport projects and demonstrate that we are adopting the lowest emission options. In terms of new technology, there is a wide range of new vehicles and control technologies entering the service, transport service, like electric vehicles, e-bikes, e-scooters, connected and autonomous vehicles, mobility as a service. So we need to understand them and how to provide for the use. Yeah, and I think just in that new technology section, you see a map of Queensland, and I'm kind of in Brisbane, which is kind of lower left side of Queensland. But what that picture is showing is the electric highway. So the state of Queensland is really promoting electric vehicle charging all the way along a highway called the Bruce Highway that goes all the way from Brisbane to all the way to the top in Cairns. Next slide, thanks. Now, in terms of mapping the transport to become greener, safer, and more livable in cities, I think now is the perfect time to pause and consider how to ensure we don't emerge from this pandemic more car dependent that we went in. There's global trends towards lower urban speed limits. For example, in Paris, there's 30 kilometers an hour measure, which is considered not an anti-car, but a response to unhealthy pollution from cars, plus the fact that the overwhelming majority of serious accidents in Paris are caused by cars. The World Health Organization in 2020, Stockholm declared, which recommends cities establish a 30-kilometer speed limit where the mix of vulnerable road users and motor vehicle traffic, and otherwise limit speeds on all urban roads to 50 kilometers an hour. Governments could do to protect and preserve a city's livability while ensuring we can still go to where we need to go to. And the ways they could do that is tackle the substantial challenge of making public transport as COVID safe as possible by improving ventilation and air filtration, enabling prospective travelers to plan and provide real-time information about how crowded the next train or bus is. They should impose a charge on drivers who enter the most congested parts of the city in peak periods. This has already been trialed, obviously, in place in London and Singapore, and most recently, I think Melbourne is considering that. And the government should reclaim car parking space and use it to make the city more attractive and safer for cyclists and pedestrians. And we obviously need to convert our cars we drive to green cars, a transition that is happening worldwide, but it's happening a bit slowly, I think, in Australia, certainly. Next slide, thanks. So now I'm at, I think I'll pick on, I suppose, the nice comments from the president of your university. First name was Rainey, I think. I think she picked on the points of, you've got to make sure we focus on getting the policy right and the strategy right before we go into the sort of sustainable projects. So what I've been, suppose my area is transportation, and I've been more in the front end of sort of transport strategies and policies. And so this slide is about the new paradigm for transport in cities. And what's happening is there's a movement, I suppose, in terms of sustainable mobility management. And if you can see the slide, it says in the past, we used to have the predict and provide, and now we're going towards a vision and validate approach. So at the heart of the proposed new paradigm is the need to reduce the dependence on cars for travel in urban areas by encouraging travel by alternative modes. And in Australia, there's a national organization called Infrastructure Australia, federal government, and it's one of the many organizations that has recognized the need to move away from the traditional planning approach of predict and provide, based largely on the extrapolation of past trends, to a more forward-looking vision and validate model. And also in 2021, the International Transport Forum has noted that there has been a weakening of the connection between road traffic and economic activity, and that they think a new transport planning paradigm, which they consider called decide and provide, is emerging. So if I can just pick on the right-hand side of this vision and validate, it basically starts with, a city setting a vision, and then you are testing different staging approach options to achieve the vision, and then selecting the preferred or the best pathway. And then you sort of validate the sort of options you've looked at, validate the forward plan by tracking the outcomes as you go, and you adjust if needed. Right at the moment in Australia, New South Wales, Queensland has just started, Western Australia, and certainly Victoria. The state governments and the local governments are looking at this new way of planning transport, which is sustainable. And I suppose it's looking at, in the past, they were just roads, but now they're looking at all modes and trying to put an emphasis on the place and placemaking. And I think, with the Jakarta MRT Jakarta, you can see that, things are planned in a way that it is for the people, and cities are for people. Next slide, please. Right. So in this slide, I would just, it's just sort of further information in relation to this vision and validate in practice. And you can see that, I think stage 3, if I can expand on, it says focus on outcomes such as air quality, health, well-being, safety, transport and resistance, and resilience and priorities. And it's like looking at holistic strategies like healthy streets and movement and place that sets out the land use and transport plan. And it is about this approach that's being used now in cities in Australia. And by the way, they have been used in UK and US already, because some of the colleagues who are working in this space now, they've brought their experiences from UK and US. And it is about strategically looking at how to make the cities sustainable. And really it is for cities, and it is for the city level. So the diagram on the right, the picture on the right, it shows a road. A road can be a street, a movement conduit, but a road could also be a place, a destination. So now I think with the multidisciplinary approach, you got to consider this. You got to look at a road or a street both for movement, and can equally be also addressed the place requirements. Thank you. The other aspect that in terms of policy and strategy in the transportation space that is moving along, and I think Winnie mentioned this, and maybe even Venkatalachalam mentioned this morning, but it is called Mobility as a Service, and it has been also trialed in Europe. And currently, University of Sydney have done a number of trials in Sydney, and I know where I'm from, the Queensland state, the government there is looking at bringing together, trialing this MES thing called Mobility as a Service in University of Queensland campus. So they are currently trialing with 1,000 students in University of Queensland in relation to Mobility as a Service. So a bit about it, you can see in the slide, a couple of examples in relation to, the MES ecosystem and how a future journey in a MES MAAS journey looks like. So the way we transit, I suppose, is being fundamentally disrupted. I know through technology and through COVID and all that. So advancements in technology coupled with trends for more personalized services are reshaping the world as we know it. So the emergence of mobility as a service is fundamentally changing the way in which communities engage with solutions that enable integrated mobility. I think this is probably something when you put in a project like the Jakarta MRT, how do you integrate with other modes? I think this is where this could come in play. So MES is about demand and how people access mobility services, and mobility is about supply, including the types of modes available for consumption, which includes active transport and public transport. And MES embodies a shift away from the privately owned car towards mobility solutions that are used as a service. The time, okay. It is a combination of public and private transport services accessed via one application, which personalized journey planning, which provides personalized journey planning, booking, and payment. So it's basically an app that integrates the various sort of mobility options that are available, but the government plays a part and the private sector plays a part. So MES can create seamless journeys for all, but the big but is, but only if the right infrastructure, transport modes, and data exist, because it obviously relies on data, all the technology and the data available. So I suppose I've spoken about a movement in place or vision and validate sort of the way cities are looked at, and then this mobility as a service has been trialed in the UK and in place, and a number of US cities are also using this. I'm sort of seeing an increase in this post-COVID in Australia. Next slide, please. So after sort of covering those sort of two policies and strategy areas, I thought I'd briefly mention the Olympics. Where the city I'm in, Brisbane, is going to be the host. So the Olympic Games will be coming back to Australia, with Brisbane named as a host for the 2032 Games. So, today is 2021. Very soon we're going to be entering 2022. So, 10, 11 years left in terms of planning. But the whole Olympic Games is about sustainability, and you can see in sort of the top left graph, pictorial, that it mentions the value of sustainability in a game situation. So over the next 10, 11 years, facilities throughout Brisbane, Gold Coast, and the Sunshine Coast will prepare for the Games, with an emphasis being placed, and this is very important, on using existing facilities. No big expenditure on big new facilities, but existing facilities. And according to the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Master Plan, 84% of the venues used will be existing or temporary. And infrastructure improvements, road transport improvements, public transport improvements that might have been in the 30-year plan for Brisbane City can now be brought forward so they're ready in time for the Olympics. And I suppose in terms of these three graphs, the top left, like I said, mentions how the aspects of delivery you got to look at as part of Olympics, which includes cost, compatibility, risk, and waste. And the value that the Games will bring is flexibility, partnership, efficiency, and sustainability. The graph or the pictorial on the right explains the economic and social values that the Games will bring to the country and to Brisbane. And the triangle on the left bottom is legacy benefits of framework. This is quite interesting that, whilst planning for games, you want to ensure it's sustainable, but also a lot of legacy elements there. You can see it says, long-term legacy, from short-term legacy to long-term legacy. There's various aspects in the triangle. So we are hoping, I suppose, that the 2032 Olympic Games will be quite sustainable when it's ready to be held in 2032. Thank you. Next slide. Now, this would be probably useful for the lecturers and the colleagues who may be at the university teaching transport. So these are just my personal comments in terms of reforming transport in engineering education. So in terms of engineering degree education, I think an understanding of ethics linked to urbanization, climate change, and new technology, I think those three areas, it was in my previous slide, ought to be taught to engineering undergraduates who may practice transport. I think it's very important that the ethics around those three subjects. The other big area in terms of degree education is big data. Transport engineering makes almost no use of some traditional aspects of engineering maths education, but considerable use of statistics and data analysis that we are not taught enough of. So as the use of big data in transport increases, we ought to be reforming the maths content of the Bachelor of Engineering degrees. I think sorry. That's my wife. Maths has changed, but our teaching of it hasn't. So I think the way we teach maths, and certainly in terms of transport, needs to be changed. Sorry. In terms of ongoing technology, with so much sort of social and technological change relating to transport, and more than any time in our career, I think practicing engineers need to develop new skills, areas where immediate change is needed. And I think my colleague, the previous speaker, mentioned, I think, obviously his pictures and diagrams are showing that. I think there's immediate change needed in terms of design of climate adaptive infrastructure, and this cannot be simply left to new graduates. So how do practicing engineers, current engineers who are out there in the workforce, keep up in the industry that will undergo rapid technological or technical change? I think that could be covered with short courses, short courses run by universities. Okay, next slide. All right. This is probably my concluding slide. And here it's a nice pictorial comparing the different modes on the left there. So we do need multidisciplinary teams. And the way I was going to talk about it is, sustainability requires many disciplines to work towards a common goal. It should be inclusive. We've got to consider safety, we consider sustainability and resilience in cities. And so, if you look on the right-hand side, it says a city's future urban transport should include. And if you look at those italics and bold, you can see, you need environmental skills, you need social, the previous speaker spoke about psychology and behavior. We need economics, we need safety, we need livability. Again, it comes like urban design, and psychology comes into that, and social aspects, integrated land use planning, that's very important. And obviously engineering in terms of the movement of people and goods, and also accommodating technological change. So you can see the sort of picture on the bottom of that list of urban transport system needs. We don't want what is shown in the picture. That's why I put a big cross across it, because we want to make sure the road space or the urban transport corridor space is more for the people. So you do need more buses and better shelters and active transport rather than for the cars. And certainly, I think you can see on the bottom left there the number of people that are carried by a bus, but then the space that the amount of cars takes when the same number of people are being moved. So we need to work collaboratively. We need to, urban sustainable development needs to be at the highest priority in cities. We need good ideas that are being implemented in different cities around the world, and collaboration on these ideas can make a difference globally. I think that was well captured by the second speaker this morning in relation to ASEAN cities and what they are doing in terms of sharing the ideas. I think that's very important. And then I think lastly, I can conclude with, even if it's transport, but same applies to water, energy, but certainly the interaction of factors in relation to environmental, societal, and economical needs to be considered in the sustainability space. I suppose the one that I didn't mention, which always is there, but I think technically we don't have to sort of I suppose go that way too much, but the fourth one could be political. You know, there's always the political side of things too, especially when it comes to implementing policies and strategies to change things to make it a sustainable way. I think that was that is my last slide, I think. Is it my last slide? Yep. Righto. Thank you.
Thank you very
Ashley.
much.